So I've been going through the March 2026 India Strategic and Global Affairs Report, and
It is a heavy read.
it's incredibly heavy. But what struck me isn't just the sheer volume of global crises happening all at the exact same time. It's how bizarrely interconnected they all are.
Yeah, the connective tissue is really what stands out this month.
Exactly. Welcome to another deep dive. If you're joining us today, you are probably looking to cut through all that noise.
Right.
Our mission today with this massive stack of intelligence is to basically map out a geopolitical chessboard for you. A chessboard where the rules are literally changing mid-game.
I mean, we are looking at a world that is caught in this really violent tug-of-war between the physical and the digital.
The physical and the digital.
Yes, that tension between the physical world, so what we might call the realm of atoms, and the digital world, the realm of bits. That is the defining undercurrent of every single source in this report.
Yeah.
We're basically witnessing a fundamental reordering of global priorities right now.
And the scope of that reordering is just staggering. So just to give you, the listener, a quick roadmap of where we're heading today. We're unpacking the sudden multi-billion-dollar reset in India-Canada relations.
Massive thaw there.
Huge. We are also tracking how a single drone strike in the Middle East is simultaneously crippling digital banking apps and forcing Indian state leaders to scramble for emergency evacuation flights.
It's the butterfly effect in real time.
Truly. Then we're examining an unprecedented crisis in the Indian Supreme Court involving artificial intelligence literally hallucinating legal history.
Which sounds like sci-fi, but is actively happening.
And to cap it all off, we're looking at a historic financial meltdown in the world of international cricket.
It sounds like a really disparate list of topics, I know, but the connective tissue we mentioned is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
Institutions, whether they are diplomatic, legal, or sporting, are all just struggling to maintain accountability in an era where technology is drastically outpacing tradition.
Let's actually test that connective tissue right now. We're jumping straight into segment 1. The geopolitical chessboard. I want to look at source item 1.
The Canada deal.
Right. It details this landmark meeting in Delhi between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. They just inked a sweeping 10-year nuclear energy deal.
A 10-year pact.
Yes, 10 years. We're talking about long-term uranium supply, joint collaboration on small modular reactors, advanced reactors, and even expanding into AI, supercomputing, and semiconductors. PM Modi explicitly called the uranium supply agreement a landmark.
And it is a landmark. But I think what's fascinating is that it's a landmark built on surprisingly fresh geopolitical ruins.
Yes.
To understand the actual gravity of a 10-year nuclear pact,
Right.
you have to look at the immediate history. I mean, just 3 years ago, right? In 2023.
The deep freeze.
The deep freeze. Diplomatic ties between Ottawa and New Delhi were practically non-existent.
Because the Canadian government had made those explosive allegations regarding the killing of Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, claiming Indian involvement.
Exactly. And India categorically rejected those allegations. They expelled diplomats. They halted visa services. It was arguably the lowest point in their bilateral history.
Which is why the sheer velocity of this turnaround is the real story here for you to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Carney's government has now formally stated they do not believe India is currently linked to violent crimes or threats on Canadian soil. This is a dramatic diplomatic pivot.
Highly dramatic, especially considering that the court case against the 4 men charged in Nijjar's killing is still ongoing in Canada.
That is.
Furthermore, the report notes that there are elements within the Canadian government, certain lawmakers, members of the Sikh community, and even their national spy agency who are still raising warnings about foreign interference.
So that naturally brings up a really critical question of motivation. Looking at Canada's internal dynamics, is a $50 billion trade target actually about geopolitical pragmatism? Or is Prime Minister Carney desperately trying to change the domestic narrative and distract voters from the fact that a highly controversial foreign interference trial is happening in his own backyard?
Right.
He even canceled a planned press conference during the Delhi trip. That suggests the optics are incredibly fragile back home.
That is the central tension of this entire agreement. Precisely. India offers scale that very few other markets can. But on the flip side, look at India's motivations. New Delhi is actively seeking to diversify its energy portfolio.
Away from Russia.
Yes. Historically, there's been a heavy reliance on Russian energy exports. But in the current global climate, relying on a single, heavily sanctioned state for your energy baseline is a massive strategic vulnerability.
Right.
Securing a 10-year supply of physical uranium from Canada guarantees the fuel needed for India's expanding nuclear grid, totally independent of Eurasian conflicts.
So we are seeing a mutual reliance on physical resources, atoms in the form of uranium, to stabilize very volatile political situations. And it seems like the Canadian public is largely receptive to this pivot.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah, the intelligence report highlights an Angus Reid poll indicating that half of Canadians believe now is the right time to restore ties with India.
Which is significant.
It is. Remarkably, more Canadians currently hold favorable views of India than of the United States.
And that polling data is exactly the political capital Carney needs. Foreign Minister Anita Anand used exactly that momentum to defend the renewed engagement.
Yeah.
She pointed out that the bilateral progress made over the past year has exceeded that of the previous 2 decades combined. When economic survival is on the line, governments will navigate incredibly complex domestic sensitivities to secure supply chains.
That concept of securing supply chains brings us directly to our next sources, items 3 and 7. Because if the Canada-India deal is a masterclass in preventing economic disruption,
The situation in West Asia is the complete opposite.
it's a real-time study in what happens when disruption is sudden, violent, and absolute. We're looking at the immediate aftermath of United States military strikes on Iran.
Strikes which resulted in the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Exactly.
An event of that magnitude completely redraws the geopolitical map of the Middle East. The secondary effects on global trade are practically instantaneous.
We saw that reality hit New Delhi on March 2nd, 2026. India's Ministry of Commerce convened an emergency multi-agency meeting.
It wasn't just diplomats in the room either.
No, this was the logistics operators, the shipping lines, the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, and the Ministry of Petroleum. Their singular focus was assessing the immediate disruptions to export-import cargo.
Because the Strait of Hormuz and the broader West Asian maritime routes are the primary arteries for global commerce. When conflict escalates to the level of targeted strikes on sovereign leadership, commercial shipping just becomes paralyzed.
Yeah.
The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas is suddenly in a race against time to secure crude oil, liquefied petroleum gas, and natural gas supplies before regional stockpiles are targeted or hoarded.
And the logistics of this are a complete nightmare. Commercial vessels have to be rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope.
Which adds weeks to transit times.
Weeks. Freight costs absolutely skyrocket. Insurance premiums for vessels entering even the periphery of the conflict zone reach prohibitive levels.
Right.
So the Indian government is promising procedural flexibility for exporters and ensuring smooth customs clearances. They're essentially trying to manually pump blood through an economic system that is suffering massive arterial blockages.
And this is where macro-geopolitics collides violently with local governance. The economic fallout is severe, but the human element is immediate. You have millions of Indian expatriates working throughout the Gulf region.
Millions.
When missiles are launched, it ceases to be an abstract foreign policy issue debated in New Delhi. It becomes a literal life-or-death crisis for families in Kerala, Punjab, or Karnataka.
Which perfectly contextualizes the reaction we saw from Karnataka Chief Minister Siddaramaiah. He released a very sharp public condemnation of the United States for the attack, calling the strike unnecessary and deeply troubling.
It did.
He accused the Trump administration of speaking about peace while actively choosing the path of war, and he offered explicit condolences on the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei.
It is a profound shift in how Indian federalism interacts with the world stage. Historically, foreign affairs were the exclusive domain of the central government. State leaders focused on domestic infrastructure, agriculture, local industry.
Sure.
However, the deep integration of regional labor into the global economy means that a chief minister now has a direct mandate to respond to international military conflicts.
And he didn't just offer rhetoric. He attached his geopolitical critique to highly specific administrative actions.
Right.
He announced that the Karnataka government was in continuous, direct contact with the Ministry of External Affairs to ensure the safe return of his constituents stranded in the Gulf. He specifically highlighted that efforts were underway to evacuate 30 individuals from the city of Bellary.
Right down to the city level.
Yes, and assured the public that residents from his state currently in Dubai were confirmed safe.
That is the modern reality of governance. A regional leader is balancing a highly publicized critique of unilateral military action by a global superpower with the incredibly granular logistical task of securing commercial flight tickets for 30 workers from Bellary.
It's wild to think about.
It demonstrates the immense pressure on India's diplomatic apparatus. New Delhi is attempting to manage a vital strategic partnership with the United States, while regional leaders are amplifying the immediate humanitarian panic of their voting base, who view the U.S. actions as a direct threat to their livelihoods and safety in the Middle East.
The local has become entirely globalized. We are watching physical supply chains and human migration routes being fractured by kinetic warfare. But what happens when the infrastructure being targeted isn't a shipping lane or an oil refinery? What if it's the fundamental architecture of the digital world?
That takes us into some very new territory.
It does. Segment 2, the new front lines. Tech, data, and defense. I want to examine source item 10, which documents a terrifying first in modern conflict.
This really is a threshold moment for global security.
Amazon Web Services, which is arguably the backbone of the modern internet, announced that their data centers, located in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, suffered direct physical damage from Iranian drone and missile strikes.
We need to pause and recognize the paradigm shift this represents. For decades, the concept of cyber warfare involved state-sponsored hackers writing malicious code to breach firewalls from thousands of miles away.
Right, digital attacks.
Exactly. This then bypasses the firewall entirely. Why attempt a complex digital intrusion when you can simply fly an explosive drone into the facility's physical cooling tower?
The vulnerability is shocking when you realize the cloud isn't actually in the sky.
No, it's not.
It's a warehouse full of servers, drawing massive amounts of electricity and requiring intense thermal regulation. AWS reported that the recovery process would be prolonged due to structural harm to the buildings, severe power disruptions, and perhaps the most ironic detail, extensive water damage caused by the facility's own fire suppression systems activating during the bombardment.
The destruction of these facilities has cascading, immediate effects on the civilian population. Major financial institutions in the region, such as the Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, experienced severe operational outages.
Yeah.
Customers woke up to find their banking platforms and mobile applications completely non-functional. The infrastructure that dictates daily life, transactions, payroll, communication, it was severed instantly.
This completely redefines the concept of strategic targets. We are entering what analysts term the compute era. Just look at the sheer volume of capital being injected into this region.
It's staggering.
Microsoft recently committed to investing $15 billion into UAE-based AI data centers by 2029, relying heavily on advanced NVIDIA processing chips. The Gulf states are aggressively attempting to transition their economies from being the global hub of fossil fuels to becoming the central hub of artificial intelligence and cloud computing.
But that transition requires acknowledging that physical servers are the new oil refineries.
Wow.
A nation's data centers, the energy grids required to power them, and the fiber optic cables connecting them to the global network are now the primary targets in any regional conflict. Adversaries understand that destroying a data center doesn't just eliminate hardware.
Yeah.
It decapitates the target nation's logistics, financial sectors, and future technological development in a single strike.
If adversaries are targeting the physical infrastructure of the digital age from the sky, the defense mechanisms required to protect that infrastructure must be absolutely flawless, which perfectly transitions to source item 11, outlining India's aggressive moves to secure its airspace. The report details India's intention to procure 5 additional squadrons of the Russian-made S-400 Sudarshan air defense missile system.
This procurement is directly informed by the system's performance in high-stakes combat scenarios.
The catalyst for this massive purchase was an event referred to as Operation Sindoor. During this 4-day conflict, Indian S-400 units reportedly achieved unprecedented success against Pakistani aircraft. The standout achievement was the interception and destruction of a high-value Pakistani spy plane.
Right.
What makes this extraordinary is that the kill occurred more than 300 kilometers inside Pakistani territory.
Let's unpack the mechanics of a 300-kilometer air kill to understand why the Indian Air Force classified this as a game-changer. Engaging a target at that distance requires the system's phased array radar to detect a stealth-capable or high-altitude asset from hundreds of miles away.
It has to see it first.
Yes. Then calculate its trajectory, launch an interceptor missile, and continuously guide that missile at hypersonic speeds across an international border to impact a maneuvering target. Achieving that level of operational precision in a live-fire scenario is a monumental technological feat.
And the S-400 units also successfully intercepted incoming cruise and ballistic missiles during the same operation. The strategic implications become even clearer when the intelligence report contrasts the Russian technology with Chinese alternatives.
The global performance data is heavily skewed here.
According to the sources, Chinese-origin HQ-9 air defense systems have demonstrated significant failures across multiple recent conflicts. Pakistan was reportedly unable to effectively deploy them to counter Indian strikes during Operation Sindoor. Similarly, the systems failed to provide adequate protection for Venezuelan leadership during recent United States actions, and they underperformed during Operation Epic Fury, a joint U.S. and Israeli campaign against Iranian assets. The narrative emerging is that while Chinese defense tech is faltering under pressure, India's Russian-supplied umbrella is establishing record-breaking defensive perimeters.
This highlights a dual-track defense strategy employed by New Delhi. The immediate reality is that India exists in a highly volatile neighborhood and requires proven, immediate kinetic security. The S-400 delivers that capability today. They secured an initial deal for 5 squadrons back in 2018, 3 of which are currently operational. Pushing for the remaining 2 while simultaneously ordering 5 more indicates a reliance on foreign hard power to secure the skies in the short term.
However, the long-term strategy acknowledges the risks of relying on external supply chains, especially given the global sanctions on Russian defense exports. The report details the parallel advancement of Project Kusha.
Yes.
This is an indigenous initiative led by India's Defense Research and Development Organization to build a domestic long-range air defense network.
It is the ultimate pragmatic bridge. Buy the most effective system available globally to ensure immediate survival, while funneling resources into domestic research to ensure that the next generation of defense infrastructure is immune to foreign embargoes.
So we've been analyzing warfare on a massive scale. Multi-million-dollar missile systems tracking targets across hundreds of kilometers and explosive drones leveling massive server farms. But source item 2 forces us to zoom all the way in. It demonstrates how incredibly mundane, consumer-level technology is equally vital to the logistics of modern terror.
This is a chilling example of how the digital footprint is reshaping intelligence gathering.
The incident in question is the aftermath of the Basaran Valley terror attack in Pahalgam. Militants armed with M4 carbines and AK-47s opened fire on civilians in a highly populated tourist area. During the subsequent investigation, security forces recovered a camera utilized by the attackers for pre-strike reconnaissance.
And it wasn't specialized military hardware.
No, it was a standard GoPro Hero 12 Black action camera.
A device you can purchase off the shelf in almost any major city on the planet. But the physical device itself is secondary to the data it generates.
The National Investigation Agency didn't simply catalog the camera as physical evidence. They forensically analyzed its digital history. They successfully traced the initial activation ping of that specific device to a server in Dongguan, China, occurring more than a year prior to the massacre in Kashmir.
Think about the investigative power of that single data point. The logistical supply chain of a terrorist cell has been exposed by the routine activation protocol of a consumer electronic device.
The NIA is now pursuing this lead aggressively. They have secured clearance from a special court in Jammu to issue a letter rogatory to Chinese authorities.
Which is a huge deal.
They are formally requesting the complete activation records, user details, and the commercial transaction history associated with that specific serial number.
The use of a letter rogatory elevates this from a local police matter to a complex diplomatic engagement. A letter rogatory is a formal request from the judiciary of one nation to the judiciary of another, seeking mutual legal assistance. It requires the involvement of the Ministry of Home Affairs and very delicate diplomatic navigation.
Why dedicate such immense bureaucratic resources to trace a single camera? Because the intelligence forces understand that mapping the journey of that GoPro from a factory in Dongguan across international borders into the hands of a handler and finally to the militants in Pahalgam could expose the entire financial and logistical networks supporting the terror cell.
Exactly.
The report notes that security forces arrived at the Basaran site after the shooting had concluded, heavily suggesting the attackers possessed detailed, pre-planned escape routes, likely scouted with that very camera. The digital trail is the only way to dismantle the network before the next attack.
We talk about the vulnerability of the compute era, but this shows its utility. Every consumer device is a potential witness. The digital exhaust we leave behind is now the primary currency of international intelligence.
That concept of digital exhaust, of code dictating reality, brings us to our most surreal segment today. Segment 3, Domestic Disputes in the Law. Tradition, Dissent, and AI. Technology isn't merely altering how we fight wars. It is fundamentally disrupting the ancient institutions we rely on to establish truth.
Let's examine source item 5.
It's a legal crisis that sounds like science fiction, but is actively unfolding in the Supreme Court of India.
The implications of this specific case cannot be overstated. It strikes at the very foundation of the adjudicatory process.
The Supreme Court, under the direction of Justices P.S. Narasimha and Alok Aradhe, was forced to intervene in a case originating from a trial court in Andhra Pradesh. The trial court judge had issued a ruling regarding an injunction and a dispute over an advocate commissioner's report detailing property features.
In the shocking element here.
The judge had dismissed objections by heavily relying on legal precedents that simply did not exist. The lawyers had utilized artificial intelligence to draft their petitions, and the AI had hallucinated entirely fictitious judgments. One of the fabricated case titles actually cited in the official court documents was Mercy versus Mankind.
The name alone should have been a massive red flag.
You would think.
But to understand why the Supreme Court reacted with such severity, we have to look at the mechanics of the common law system.
Break down exactly why hallucinated precedent is so dangerous to a trial court.
Common law relies entirely on the doctrine of stare decisis. That's the principle that courts should look to past historical decisions when ruling on a similar case today. Precedent is the mechanism that ensures the law is predictable, consistent, and fair.
Right.
If you are arguing a property dispute, you cite how higher courts have previously resolved identical property disputes. The system assumes as a baseline that the history being cited actually occurred.
So when a large language model, which is fundamentally designed to predict a text that sounds highly plausible regardless of factual accuracy, invents a case like Mercy versus Mankind, it isn't just a typo.
It is the introduction of a synthetic reality into the justice system. If lawyers, desperate to save time, submit AI-generated petitions without rigorous verification and an overburdened trial court judge accepts those citations as fact, the entire assembly line of justice derails.
Yeah.
You are no longer arguing the merits of the law. You are arguing the merits of a fiction generated by a predictive algorithm.
And the Supreme Court's response was definitive. They stated that relying on fake AI judgments is not merely an error in decision-making. It constitutes severe professional misconduct with immediate legal consequences.
Rightly so.
They halted the trial court from proceeding further on the flawed report. They issued formal notices to the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and the Bar Council of India, and they appointed a senior advocate to investigate the broader systemic threat. Chief Justice Surya Kant publicly noted an alarming growing trend of lawyers submitting these hallucinated documents.
It is an institutional crisis. The judiciary is being forced to implement immediate procedural safeguards to verify the authenticity of precedent. Otherwise, the fundamental concept of legal truth dissolves into algorithmic noise.
We are seeing the courts forced to define the boundaries of acceptable behavior in an increasingly complex world. This is equally evident in source item 6, which deals with a high-profile legal battle over the limits of political dissent.
This case is a fascinating examination of how constitutional rights intersect with international diplomacy.
The incident occurred at the heavily publicized AI Impact Summit. Members of the Indian Youth Congress, including their president Uday Banerjee, organized a protest against a newly proposed India-U.S. trade deal.
Right.
The demonstration involved protesters entering the summit venue wearing white shirts that displayed images of Prime Minister Narendra Modi alongside U.S. President Donald Trump. The shirts featured highly provocative slogans, including India-U.S. trade deal, references to the Epstein files, and the phrase, PM is compromised.
Deploying that specific imagery and language at a summit populated by international media and foreign delegates is designed to maximize political embarrassment.
And the immediate response from law enforcement was swift. The Delhi police arrested 14 individuals. During the bail hearings, the police fiercely opposed their release, presenting two primary arguments. First, they alleged the protesters had assaulted police personnel. Second, and more significantly for constitutional law, they argued that characterizing the trade deal as a compromise in front of the international press actively harmed India's international relations.
They invoked Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution for this.
They did?
This is where the legal theory meets practical application. Article 19(1) of the Constitution is the bedrock of democratic expression. It guarantees the freedom of speech. However, it's not absolute. Article 19.2 empowers the state to impose reasonable restrictions on that freedom to protect specific interests, such as the security of the state, public order, and the maintenance of friendly relations with foreign states.
So the police essentially argued that deeply embarrassing the prime minister regarding a bilateral treaty in front of a global audience threatened those friendly foreign relations, thereby justifying the suppression of the protest under Article 19.2.
And the judicial process involved a duty magistrate initially granting bail, a sessions judge temporarily staying that order, and ultimately the Delhi High Court intervening. The core of the judiciary's final decision rested on the definition of the protest itself.
The courts determined that the demonstration constituted symbolic political dissent rather than organized crime or recidivist violence.
Yeah.
The ruling noted that the protesters utilized non-insightful slogans, relying primarily on the visual impact of the shirts,
Yes.
and that they exited the venue in an orderly fashion without causing property damage or inciting panic among the summit delegates.
The most crucial phrase in the court's reasoning was the requirement for constitutional calibration.
What exactly does constitutional calibration look like in practice here?
The court established that law enforcement cannot utilize Article 19.2 as a blunt instrument to silence a brief, nonviolent political critique simply because it occurs at an international event. The slogans, while embarrassing to the administration, lacked any communal or regional provocation.
Okay.
Therefore, they did not cross the threshold into a genuine threat against public order.
It is a delicate balancing act, especially considering the political stakes. Prime Minister Modi had publicly accused the Congress Party of actively attempting to defame the nation and the armed forces through these types of protests. Yet, the judiciary maintained that the constitutional right to symbolic dissent remains intact, even when subjected to the glare of international scrutiny.
It demonstrates the institutional friction inherent in a functioning democracy. The state attempts to project absolute stability abroad, while the judiciary protects the internal right to challenge that projection.
That theme of internal friction brings us to source item 4. We travel to Tamil Nadu to examine a controversy that perfectly encapsulates the ongoing collision between ancient cultural traditions and modern administrative politics.
The dispute over the Tirupurankundram temple lamplighting.
The controversy centers on the Deepathun, a stone pillar situated atop the Tirupurankundram hill. Traditionally, a lamp is lit on this pillar during the Karthigai Deepam festival. However, local administrative authorities disallowed the lighting of the lamp. The stated rationale was that performing the ritual could potentially trigger conflict between different local communities, despite the fact that the Madras High Court had previously issued a ruling permitting Hindus to perform the ceremony.
The administrative logic here prioritizes the maintenance of immediate public order over the execution of a permitted historical religious practice.
This local administrative decision rapidly escalated into a national political flashpoint. Prime Minister Modi visited the temple, offered prayers, and subsequently addressed a massive National Democratic Alliance rally in Madurai.
He did.
During his address, he directly targeted the ruling DMK government, accusing them of gross insensitivity toward the deeply held sentiments of the devotees, and confidently stated that the faith of the devotees would ultimately prevail over administrative hurdles.
The narrative deployed here highlights a core political strategy, championing cultural sentiment and religious freedom against what is framed as heavy-handed secular state interference in deeply rooted traditions.
The response from Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin was equally strategic, utilizing a highly specific platform. He released a video message on his 73rd birthday to defend his government's stance.
Right.
He articulated that his decision to halt the lamplighting was executed strictly in his capacity as chief minister, with the primary objective of safeguarding long-term temple tradition by preventing immediate communal violence. He argued that personal faith should not be weaponized for political gain.
But the most fascinating aspect of Stalin's defense was his invocation of historical philosophy.
Yes, he anchored his argument in the legacy of the Dravidian movement. He pushed back against the premise that rationality and faith are inherently opposing forces. To illustrate his point, he cited the well-documented historical friendship between Periyar Ramasamy, the famous rationalist and social reformer, and Kundrakudi Ponnambalam Adigalar, a prominent spiritual leader.
By referencing that specific relationship, Stalin is attempting to frame his government's administrative actions not as anti-religious, but as deeply rooted in a uniquely regional philosophy of coexistence, shared identity, and collective social progress. It is a counter-narrative designed to neutralize the accusation of insensitivity.
It is incredible how a dispute over lighting a single lamp on a stone pillar can instantly become a proxy battleground for two fundamentally different visions of statehood, culture, and governance. We see the courts trying to enforce accountability through precedent and politicians trying to enforce it through administrative orders.
Right.
But what happens when an institution attempts to enforce accountability using sheer brute financial force?
That transitions us into the realm of professional sports, where the metrics for success and failure are absolute.
We are moving to segment 4, the ultimate penalty. Cricket in crisis. We're looking at source items 8 and 9, which detail an absolute implosion within the Pakistan national cricket team.
It is a narrative of profound systemic failure.
The context is the 2026 ICC Men's T20 World Cup. Pakistan suffered a humiliating early exit during the Super 8 stage. The breaking point, the match that triggered the current crisis, was a fixture against Sri Lanka. Pakistan posted a massive total of 221 runs.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the mechanics of T20 cricket, scoring 221 runs in 20 overs is an incredibly dominant batting performance. It should guarantee a victory.
It should. However, the Pakistani bowling attack completely collapsed, failing to restrict Sri Lanka to 148 runs or fewer, which was the mathematical threshold required for Pakistan to advance in the tournament.
To fail to defend a target of that magnitude indicates a total breakdown in execution, strategy, and mental fortitude under pressure. And as the intelligence report highlights, this is not an isolated catastrophic event. This early exit extends a dismal pattern wherein the national team has failed to reach semifinals in 4 consecutive International Cricket Council events.
The reaction from the Pakistan Cricket Board, the PCB, has been nothing short of draconian. PCB Chairman Mohsin Naqvi has reportedly initiated the process to impose an unprecedented financial penalty, a fine of 50 lakh rupees on every single member of the national squad.
A fine of that size, applied blanketly across an entire national roster, is virtually unheard of in modern international sports. It represents a seismic shift in how a governing body attempts to manage performance.
The sources indicate this drastic action was actually premeditated. Following their initial group stage defeat to arch-rivals India, Naqvi publicly stated that the team required a major surgery. It appears this historic collective fine is the primary instrument of that surgery.
We have to analyze the psychological rationale behind the PCB's decision. Why opt for a massive collective fine rather than the traditional methods of terminating the head coach or replacing the captaincy? The board clearly views this repeated failure not merely as a lack of technical skill, but as indicative of a deep, pervasive cultural rot within the dressing room.
That assessment is actually supported by the team's own leadership. Captain Salman Ali Agha, who endured a miserable tournament himself, averaging a mere 10.0 runs with the bat, publicly admitted that the squad suffers from an over-reliance on individual brilliance rather than executing a cohesive, collective strategy.
The PCB's logic is brutal but clear. These athletes receive substantial financial compensation and immense public adulation when they succeed. Therefore, when the board perceives that personal ambition and self-preservation are superseding the collective goal of winning for the nation, the athletes must face crippling financial accountability for their structural, repeated failures.
The fallout is highly public and incredibly toxic. Former national captain Shahid Afridi went on national television and systematically dismantled the current team structure. He heavily criticized the selection of all-rounder Shahid Khan, openly accused head coach Mike Hessen of blatant favoritism, and demanded an immediate change in leadership.
He specifically called for Fakhar Zaman to take over the captaincy to inject what he termed an aggressive mindset into the squad. It is a complete breakdown of institutional order.
However, within this chaotic landscape of collective punishment and public recrimination, the report highlights one truly extraordinary complication. There is a single, lone exception to the 50 lakh rupee fine.
Yes, we have to talk about Sahibzada Farhan. His individual performance during the tournament was genuinely historic. While the team crumbled around him, Farhan scored an incredible 383 runs across the tournament, maintaining an average of 76.60.
He scored 2 centuries. Most significantly, he broke the long-standing 2014 record held by Indian legend Virat Kohli for the most runs scored in a single edition of the T20 World Cup.
He achieved statistical immortality during the exact same matches where his teammates were cementing a legacy of failure.
And because of that unparalleled individual brilliance, the PCB has deemed him the only player exempt from the financial penalty.
Consider the psychological environment within that locker room. You have a squad of elite professional athletes currently enduring unprecedented public humiliation and a devastating financial sanction. And sitting among them is the singular individual who is exempt, holding a newly minted world record.
The tension must be palpable. It raises a fundamental question about the efficacy of punitive management in high-stakes environments.
Exactly. Does arbitrarily fining a bowler 50 lakh rupees suddenly improve their ability to execute a high-pressure delivery in the final over of a match? Or does a collective punishment of this magnitude simply breed deep-seated resentment, destroy any remaining team cohesion, and guarantee that moving forward, the players will operate out of a paralyzing fear of failure rather than an ambition to succeed? The PCB is attempting to buy discipline through fear. History suggests that rarely cures the underlying disease.
We will have to watch whether Nafi's financial surgery saves the patient or ultimately kills it. It is a dramatic, highly concentrated example of the themes we've been tracking today.
It truly is. We have traversed an incredible amount of ground across this intelligence report.
To synthesize this massive stack of information, we began by mapping the shifting geopolitical chessboard. We watched Canada and India navigate a volatile history of assassination allegations to secure a $50 billion economic and nuclear energy lifeline. We saw how a targeted drone strike against an Iranian leader sends immediate crippling shockwaves through the global supply chain, forcing a state chief minister in Karnataka to balance international diplomacy with the emergency evacuation of laborers from Bellary.
We examined the terrifying new reality of modern conflict, where the physical destruction of a cloud data center in the UAE instantly paralyzes digital banking. We contrasted that vulnerability with India's reliance on Russian S-400 systems to execute 300-kilometer aerial intercepts, while simultaneously realizing that the digital footprint of a single consumer GoPro camera is the key to unraveling complex terror logistics.
We watched the pillars of society struggle to adapt to this speed. The Supreme Court is actively battling the existential threat of AI hallucinating legal history. The Delhi High Court is forced to precisely calibrate the constitutional limits of political dissent at international summits. A chief minister is invoking the Dravidian philosophy of Periyar to justify administrative control over a temple lamp. And a national cricket board is attempting to enforce cultural discipline with a historic financial sledgehammer.
The overarching takeaway from this entire intelligence brief is that the established playbooks are failing. Whether you are a prime minister negotiating a 10-year uranium supply, a trial judge attempting to verify if a legal precedent was invented by an algorithm, or a cricket administrator managing a fractured dressing room, the fundamental rules of engagement have permanently shifted.
They absolutely have. And that brings us back to the tension we identified at the very beginning of this deep dive. Throughout all these sources, we see our infrastructure, our legal precedents, our intelligence gathering, and our economy becoming increasingly digital and abstract. We are fighting over AI data centers and hallucinated code. But simultaneously, nations are desperately rushing to secure the physical foundations: uranium, shipping lanes, and kinetic air defense systems.
The friction between atoms and bits.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder as you navigate this changing landscape. As we look toward the next decade, will the ultimate power in our world belong to the nations and institutions that control the raw, physical resources of the Earth? Or will absolute power ultimately reside with those who control the code that directs it? It is something you'll have to consider. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We love unpacking these incredible, complex stories with you. Stay curious, keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.